Reading with your kids.
Hey, my friends, happy day after Christmas. My name is Jedley, and this is a special episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Today, we're looking back at an original short story created for the Reading with Your Kids podcast by our friends at CatholicTeenBooks.com. Carolyn Asphalt, AJ Capitan, Tony Kolink, Stephanie Engelman, Leslie Wall, Marie Kaiser, Andrea Jo Rogers, and Corinna Turner are joining us. Before they join us, please know how happy and grateful we are that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcast. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy a Fowl Christmas.
If that dog's tail hung any further between its legs, the furry white tip would tickle its black and white snout. The year-old beagle slunk through the doorway to the living room, its nails tapping on the hardwood. Finding a patch of sunlight, it flopped onto the floor, chin resting on its paws. I sighed. Poor Snoopy. He hadn't meant to send our family's life into chaos, but here we were, and he knew it. Somehow he knew it. Life had already been crazy. Since Dad's dream had died, his Peruvian restaurant going belly up in the wake of COVID shutdowns and staffing shortages, Mom had taken a new job, one that took her away for 10 days of training, halfway across the country. At home, Dad's moping, understandable, but still moping, took a turn when Snoopy, agitated yet again by the neighbor's propensity to shoot off bottle rockets for what my little brother Blake called no random reason, got underfoot and sent Dad down, hard, to the tune of 2 broken bones. "Derek, did you feed the chickens?" Dad bellowed from his lazy boy recliner where his foot rested, elevated above his chest. I groaned, softly, so Dad wouldn't hear. His Peruvian chickens, the bane of my teenage existence as of late. Did I mention we're not Peruvian? I'm a 4th-generation Minnesotan. Anywho, doing it now, Dad. I grabbed my zip-up hoodie from the back of the kitchen chair where I'd left it, slipped it on, and pushed open the door against a cold, stiff breeze. I shivered, rubbing my arms uselessly, then jogged to the shed where we stored the chicken feed. As I flung feed to the poultry, I imagined the Christmas feast only 3 days away. I smiled, picturing Mom's extended family descending on our house Christmas Day, dragging sacks of wrapped presents and balancing tins of homemade cookies. Mom had 4 sisters and 2 brothers, all with a bunch of kids. All but 2 families lived within about 100 miles or so, and we rotated the celebration, the feast, from home to home. This was our year. Based on the texts Mom had sent, cutting things close with her work trip was making her anxious. She always got that way, though. She'd get within a hair's breadth of panicking, and then everything would magically come together. The glazed ham, the candied yams, the homemade dinner rolls, Grandma's recipe, and whatever green stuff she felt obliged to serve alongside it all. A hen clucked at my feet, then skittered off as a larger bird nipped at her. I returned the feed to the shed and dashed back inside, eager for the warmth. I kicked off my tennis shoes, aiming at the mudroom, and sauntered toward the living room. Dad's voice sounded from the lazy boy. Mom was supposed to call before she boarded the airplane. It was a little early, but maybe her flight had gotten moved up. I rounded the corner to see Dad sitting up, gimpy leg extended in front of him. "Ah, geez, Rhonda, what a mess." Dad ran a hand through his thinning hair. "That's not going to work. How can I—" Mom must have cut him off. She did that sometimes when she was anxious, just rolled right over what someone else was saying, like she had to get her thought out or else. "I know it's not your fault. Yeah, I'll call Jody. We'll have to move it." Dad eased the chair back, resigned. They'd better not be talking about the Christmas feast and pawning it off on Aunt Jody. It was our year. I didn't know what was happening on the other end of that call, but we were hosting Christmas this year. Airport drama, broken leg, whatever. I'd do it myself if I had to, and enlist Blake.
Part 2 by AJ Catapan. Dad, I eased my way into the living room. What's up with Mom? Dad sighed. Flight canceled. Something about a sick pilot. I'm going to have to ask Aunt Jody to host the Christmas feast this year. He tapped his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Wait, I stepped in front of him. Can't Mom take another flight? At this time of year? Dad let out a humorless chuckle. You do know it's Christmas in 3 days, right? All the flights are booked. Your mom's looking at taking a long train ride home, and the next one of those doesn't even leave until tomorrow. But she'd still make it home in time for Christmas, right? I mean, if we got everything ready, decorated the tree, cleaned the house, prepared all the food, we could still do it. Derek, your mom didn't even have time to do the food shopping before she left. He gestured to his leg. And I'm certainly not going to be driving to a store in the near future. Ugh. And I only had my learner's permit. Why did my birthday have to be in January? If it had been a month earlier to have my provisional license by now, there's got to be a way, Dad. Blake and I have been looking forward to our turn to host for years. Just give me some time to think of something. Promise me you won't call Aunt Jody yet. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Derek, but if your aunt is going to host, she's going to need time to do some food shopping too. Just 1 hour, Dad. Just give me an hour. He set his phone down on his lap. This had better be a good plan. Thanks, Dad. I ran upstairs to Blake's room. He was sitting on his bed reading whatever sci-fi book was his latest obsession. Blake, I burst in. He looked over the edge of his book. Don't you ever knock? Sorry, it's important. Blake rolled his eyes. He had his quirks, including the wildest imagination of anyone I knew, which meant he was the perfect person to help me think up a scheme to save the Christmas feast. As soon as I told him about Mom's flight problems, he put down his book and listened intently. I could almost see the gears in his mind moving. Well, he said slowly, as if the thought were still forming in his head, I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it. Anything, Blake. Right now, the best idea I've got is hooking up your old red wagon to my bike and dragging the food back to our house through the snow. You're going to have to call Grace. I shook my head as memories from the Christmas turnabout dance flooded my mind. It hadn't been pretty. Grace and I had been best buds since the first day of preschool. Our teacher told us that a sparkle fairy visited her classroom each night, so every morning we were supposed to check for sparkles the fairy had left behind. Grace was seated next to me on the mat. She looked at me, her dark eyes shining, and said, Want to help me look for sparkles tomorrow? I didn't care much about sparkles, but I loved treasure hunts. That was the first of our adventures together. For years, we'd always come up with crazy schemes for hunting for things. When Riley O'Connor asked me to the Christmas dance, Grace suddenly stopped talking to me. I don't know why she was so upset. It's not like she had asked me to the dance. Anyway, things were now really awkward between us. I didn't even know she'd take my call. Blake reached across his bed and grabbed my phone. Call her, he said. She's got her license already. You know it's the only way.
Part 3 by Anthony Barone Kolenk. He threw me the cell. Fine, I said, clicking my contacts. Grace answered her phone on the third ring. I didn't think I'd be hearing from you any time soon, she said after I stuttered my hello. How's Riley? Is that even a girl's name? That told me everything I needed to know. Grace, I was going to ask you to go, really. It's just, well, I didn't want things to get weird between us. Then Riley asked me, and I felt on the spot, and I thought maybe it would be better this way, and then... Grace didn't say a word, but Snoopy jumped on the bed. I flopped down and let him lick my face. And then things got weird anyway, didn't they? I'm sorry, Grace. I don't blame you if you don't want to help my family now. That got her attention. Help your family? She was practically part of our family after all the years we'd been friends. What do you mean? I told her the whole story. Let me get this straight, Derek. You need someone with a car to drive in the snowstorm they're predicting tonight and then cook a meal for 30 people? I could practically see her smirking, even though we weren't FaceTiming. And you thought of me for that? The way she said it didn't make me feel particularly brilliant. Yeah, that's about the gist. Challenge accepted, she said. Did your mom leave a menu? I laughed. Not really, but Dad will remember what we did last time. It's only like 5 courses. Glazed ham, candied yams, stuff like that. I'm pretty sure my aunts bring dessert. Grace sighed. It's impossible, you know. I mean, I can get you to a store, and I might be able to heat up some green beans, but I don't even know what a candied yam looks like. We're going to need help with the cooking, Einstein. She was right as usual. Well, maybe Blake can go on the internet and... Blake kicked my leg with his foot. He was smiling. That was never a good sign. Hold on, Grace. Blake pointed out the window as though that meant something. Teresa, Eva, hello. Teresa and Eva were old widowed sisters who lived down the block and used to eat at Dad's Peruvian restaurant before COVID shut it down. They used to nag Dad to fire his chef and hire them instead. Apparently they were pretty good cooks. We just need to get them to help us, Blake said. If we get all the stuff and they help with the cooking, we can totally do this. Grace agreed. Why is your brother so smart? Grab your coats and meet me outside in 10 minutes. Dad wasn't as thrilled with the plan. I appreciate you boys stepping up, but, what if Teresa won't do it? What if I can't remember all the food? What if Mom says no? Please, Dad, all you gotta do is give us your credit card and text us a shopping list before we get to the store. As far as Mom goes, we can make it a surprise for her, Blake said. An early Christmas gift. Dad was always a sucker for us kids trying to do something nice for Mom. He pulled a card out of his wallet on the edge of the recliner. When Grace pulled up a minute later, we were standing at the curb watching snowflakes cover the blacktop. We drove to Teresa's house first. All three of us knocked on her door. Derek? Teresa looked concerned when she answered, Eva at her side. Your padre sent you here. Come in. We entered their warm little house, which smelled like burritos. They sat us on a long sofa with orange swirls and gave us each a cookie. Tell Tia Teresa what happened. I explained everything, but the more I spoke, the more her eyes darkened. No, so much work to do. You should let your Tia Jody do it, like your padre said. But I could almost feel a tear coming to my eye. We just really wanted... Unless, Eva said, smiling. She spoke in Spanish to her sister, and then Teresa smiled too. Okay, we'll do it, Teresa said. If, Eva's voice was firm, only if tu padre gives us all those beautiful Peruvian chickens.
Part 4 by Stephanie Engelman. The chickens? Sí, Teresa confirmed with a smug smile. Los pollos. But Dad loves those chickens, I argued. They're his babies. There's no way he'll give them up. Eva crossed her arms and leaned back into her chair resolutely. If tu padre wants us to help with tu Christmas, he'll give us the chickens. I looked at Grace. She shook her head. When I turned to Blake, though, he was rising from the sofa. Okay, he said. You want Peruvian chickens? We'll get Peruvian chickens. Not just any Peruvian chickens, Teresa shook a finger in Blake's direction. Tu padre's Peruvian chickens. They are special. Right, Blake nodded his head. Dad's chickens. No problem. We're on it. He walked to the door, but turned around when we failed to follow him. Come on, guys, he said. We've got work to do. Grace and I shared a look, then rose from the couch together and followed Blake out the door. Once we were in the car, I let loose. Blake! I twisted around in my seat to yell at my brother in the back. What are you thinking? Dad's not going to give up his chickens. He'd just as soon give you up. Relax, bruh. Blake held up a hand to silence me. How many times have Teresa and Eva seen Dad's chickens? I don't know, I sputtered. Once? Twice, maybe? Exactly, Blake smiled smugly. So we find some other Peruvian chickens and pass them off as Dad's. The sisters will never know the difference. Seems kind of dishonest, Grace interjected. Blake shrugged. Yeah, well, it seems kind of wrong that they want Dad's prized chickens, so... You're right, I agreed. It is wrong, and they can't possibly remember what Dad's chickens look like. So we go back to the place where Dad got the baby chicks and pick out some grown ones that look like Dad's. Fine, Grace said, and she revved the engine. Now, where to? Hold on a sec, I said. I was with Dad when he got the chicks. I should be able to figure out where it is. A few minutes later, I pointed Grace down the road toward a neighboring town. It was normally only about a 10-minute drive, but Grace drove slowly on the snowy road, so it took twice as long. It was good to be back with Grace, though, so I didn't mind. Just like old times before the Christmas dance. We talked about our semester finals, the kid in algebra that got caught cheating off Grace's exam, and the principal's near meltdown during the end-of-semester all-school gathering. Turn here, I directed, looking at the map on my phone. We'll go about another mile, and then we should see the sign for the chicken farm. Grace negotiated the corner, hands tightening on the wheel. Derek, she said as she came out of the turn, I have to tell you something. I turned in my seat to try to read her expression. She chewed on her bottom lip and tears shimmered in her eyes. What is it? I urged. I'm sorry I haven't told you sooner, Grace said, eyes trained on the road in front of her. I wanted to, and then I was about to tell you when I found out you were going to the dance with Riley, and then She shook her head. Whoa! Blake yelled. What's that? I'd forgotten all about him sitting in the back seat behind me. Now his arm was stretched between me and Grace, finger pointing toward a pillar of black smoke rising from the countryside ahead of us. I sat forward in my seat, straining to see the source of the smoke. Oh no, I groaned. Grace slowed as the sign for the chicken farm came into view. The long drive led through a snow-covered field, straight toward the billowing column of gray. Oh no, she echoed. She turned down the drive and snaked along it. We crested a hill and the barn came into view. Flames licked at the edges of the hayloft window.
Part 5 by Leslie Wall. We no longer needed to rely on my memory to direct us to the Peruvian chicken farm. The dark smoke ominously led the way. When we reached the farm, Grace parked the car on the side of the road, and we silently watched the billowing smoke waft through the crisp winter air. As we piled out of the car, a woman in a heavy wool coat rushed towards us. Even though she was bundled from head to toe, I recognized Mrs. Dooley from when we bought the chickens. Her thick glasses and white curls, which peeked out from under her knit hat, were unmistakable. When she reached us, she flung her arms around me. I knew you'd come. I stared down at the top of her head. How could she know we were coming? We didn't even know until 20 minutes ago. She pulled away and pointed toward the barn. Fred said all hope was lost, but I had faith. Grace stepped forward. Is there anything we can do to help? The woman's voice continued to tumble forth. Yes, please. The chickens are in the fenced yard, but as soon as the firemen arrive, they will open the gate and the chickens will escape. Blake nodded in understanding. You want us to help you round up the chickens. The woman's head bobbed up and down. There's nothing important in that old barn, but the chickens, those we can't afford to lose. I glanced at Grace, but she was already racing with Blake toward the enclosed pen. I sprinted after them and soon saw the heavy-set figure of Mr. Dooley as he slowly stalked a beautiful red-feathered chicken. His face was set in determination as he edged forward. Then, in one swift move, he snatched the chicken and carried it toward one of the cages that lined the fence. Soon we were all in the pen chasing Peruvian chickens as large white snowflakes drifted down from the sky. We slipped and slid across the cold Minnesota ground as we tried to capture those birds. One by one, we began to gather them. As the distant fire engine sirens increased in volume, my determination grew. There were only a few more to catch. As I set my sights on a large mottled black bird, Grace caught my attention and motioned for me to head one way while she went another. We nearly had that chicken cornered when suddenly it let out an ear-piercing squawk and flapped out of Grace's grasp. The sudden movement made Grace's feet slip out from under her, and she landed spread eagle on her back. I desperately lunged for the sneaky chicken, but ended up falling as well. The cold, frozen dirt acted as a sheet of ice, causing me to slide across the field right into Grace. Luckily, Blake swooped in out of nowhere and snatched the panicked avian. Before he carried away the last chicken, he glanced down at us, sprawled in a tangle of limbs. With moves like that, maybe it's a good thing you two didn't go to the dance together. Grace and I looked at each other, then burst out laughing. It felt so good to be laughing again with Grace. I'd really missed hanging out with her. I slowly pushed myself off the cold ground and reached out a hand to help her up. Hey, what were you going to tell me back in the car before all the excitement? She opened her mouth to say something, then her gaze focused behind me. I turned to see Mr. and Mrs. Dooley walking toward us. Behind them, the firemen unreeled their hose and trudged through the gate with all their gear. Mrs. Dooley had been right. All the scared chickens would have escaped and scattered if we hadn't rounded them up. Mr. Dooley offered a smile of gratitude. Thank you, kids, for your help. His gaze narrowed on my face. You and your father bought some chickens from us a while back, right? I nodded. Yes, sir. He rubbed his whiskery chin. I know this is a lot to ask, but do you think your father would mind watching a few of our chickens over the holidays? We obviously can't house them in the barn, and we can't keep them in our home. His wife gave him a nudge. See, I told you God would answer our prayers. He brought these children right to us when we needed them most. I glanced at the cages full of squawking chickens. We came for chickens, but not that many. Dad would go ballistic if we brought home all those extra chickens when we were about to host a huge family dinner. But how could we possibly say no if we really were the answer to their prayer? So that's how we ended up driving back toward town with 2 cages full of Peruvian chickens.
Section 6 by Marie Kaiser. It was already getting dark by the time we got all the chickens loaded into the trunk. Snowflakes swirled in the headlights, but the roads weren't too bad yet. So what was it you wanted to tell me? I asked as we got back on the main road into town. Grace took a deep breath and looked at me, then quickly refocused on the road. I was desperately curious about what Grace had to tell me. Whatever it was seemed to have her pretty upset. My dad lost his job, she said finally, in a cold, flat voice. I'm sorry. Well, that stank. My dad lost his restaurant, and if her dad was as upset about his job as my dad was about his business, at least her dad would qualify for unemployment, I imagined. Is he pretty upset? I asked. No, not so much. She sniffled, and I realized she was crying again. It's not that. You see, he's looking for a new job, and there aren't any jobs like that around here. So we're probably going to have to move before the end of the school year. She sniffed again. Oh. Now it made sense. Grace's entire life was here. Her friends, her school, me. She'd even landed a major role in the spring play, and now she was leaving? I'm so sorry, I said again, not knowing what to add. She sniffed again and pulled into the supermarket parking lot. Blake handed her a box of Kleenex he'd found in the back seat. Hey, at least I'm here for Christmas. She blew her nose and tried to smile. So let's go buy food for 30 people. I looked at the phone to see what my dad had sent the list. Whew, I whistled. I think we're going to need 2 carts. Despite Grace's sad news, we had fun shopping, and we were all laughing as we piloted 2 loaded carts back to the car. Grace popped the trunk, and I opened it, ready to load up our haul, when I was greeted by a muffled clucking. This isn't gonna work, I said, and we all dissolved into laughter again. Eventually we got everything in, putting the last bag on Blake's lap. The snow crunched underfoot as we carried the chickens to the coop and let them in. They fluttered their wings sleepily and settled down, and we went to bring in the groceries. Your mom called, Dad shouted from the living room as we dragged in the first batch of groceries. She got a train ticket. She's supposed to arrive at the train station in town here early Christmas morning, and she's planning on getting an Uber from there. Now, of course, the train is usually late, but great. At least Mom should be back in time before the relatives arrived. Maybe she'd even be there to help put the finishing touches on dinner. Dad's gaze shifted behind me to where Grace and Blake were dragging in yet another load of groceries. So, you got Teresa and Eva to say they'd cook? Yeah, so about that. They said they'd cook dinner if they could have your chickens, Blake called out from the kitchen. He believed in ripping Band-Aids off quickly. What? My dad roared. Hey, it's not as bad as it sounds. Well, what happened? He sighed in a resigned sort of way. So they said they wanted your chickens, but Blake thought if we could just get some similar chickens at the chicken farm. So we drove out to the chicken farm, but the farm was on fire, Blake shouted helpfully from the kitchen. What? Dad gave me a puzzled look. Yeah, the chicken farm was on fire, so we helped them catch the chickens, and then they asked us to take some home with us since they didn't have a barn anymore, so we did. Dad seemed to be trying to decide whether to believe me or not. So, how many chickens do we have out there now? 18. His jaw dropped. 18. I grinned nervously. I'd better start getting home now, Grace said, before the roads get any worse. Well, my dad said after we'd all thanked Grace and she was on her way, I guess we're stuck with it now. There's no way we're going to be able to eat 20 pounds of yams and 3 hams all by ourselves. I just hope it works. We ate a dinner of frozen pizza, and then Blake and I got out the tree and the lights and started decorating. Derek! My dad's voice woke me up out of a sound sleep. I glanced at the clock. Only 7:30. What's that sound? What sound? I asked. I hadn't heard anything. Did you bring roosters home with you last night? Had we? I hadn't checked. But there it was. Something was crowing in the backyard. You know we can't have roosters in city limits. I groaned. It's just for a few days. It should be fine, right? I sure hope so. I buried my face in my hands. This wasn't going like I'd imagined it. Still, like my dad had said, we were stuck with it now, and I might as well get sleepy-headed Blake up and start doing some more cleaning and decorating. After all, Teresa and Ava would help with the cooking. At least that couldn't go wrong. We vacuumed, dusted, swept, did laundry, washed dishes, and hung lights. By mid-afternoon we were exhausted and decided to join Dad in the living room for a movie break. We just sat down when the doorbell rang. Blake and I went to get the door. Teresa and Ava were there, each holding a large pan. Make that 2 large pans. Here's the tamales, Teresa said, handing me the pans as I opened the door. We just finished them up. Ava followed her in and handed her pans to Blake. The bottom one is the panetones, and on the top is the salsa verde. You guys enjoy. We're off to Iowa now to see our brother. We'll get the chickens when we come back. Merry Christmas. They walked out, leaving Blake and me staring. Tamales? What was that? Dad called from the living room. I think I may have forgotten to tell them what I broke off as the doorbell rang again. I set my pens down on the counter and opened the door. Hello, said the police officer on the doorstep. Are your parents home? We just got a call about a noise violation at this address. Right on cue, one of the roosters started crowing.
Part 7, Andrea Rogers. My stomach flip-flopped. When we agreed to take the chickens, we thought we were simply helping out. It didn't occur to me that we might be breaking the law. An image of a red rooster on a police poster stating, "Wanted dead or alive," popped into my head. I shoved the thought aside. Officer, I think I can explain. You see, the Dooley's Peruvian chicken farm burned down yesterday. They asked us to house their chickens for a few days until they can make emergency repairs. Our mom is away on a business trip. Our dad is here in the living room, but he can't really walk. He has a broken foot, Blake explained. Yeah, it's been a pretty rough year. He lost his restaurant, too, I added. The officer nodded. That's too bad. Which one was that? The Peruvian one on the corner of 8th and Morris, Blake replied. You don't say. I've eaten there many times. I'll tell you what. I'll let you keep the roosters here until New Year's Day. Just do me a favor and try to keep them as quiet as possible, the police officer said. And have a Merry Christmas. I breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you. You too. As I closed the door, my mind turned to Grace. I thought back to yesterday when I landed on top of her at the chicken farm. The memory made me feel warm all over. I wish I'd asked her to the Christmas dance. I've always thought of her as my best friend, but now I started to daydream about what it might be like to take our friendship to the next level. Of course, now it was too late. Soon Grace and her family would be gone. Blake interrupted my thoughts. We didn't just forget to tell Teresa and Eva that we wanted to have glazed ham and candied yams. We must not have told them how many people are coming. There aren't nearly enough tamales to feed everyone. We're still going to have to make the ham. I noticed that too. Dad said he could probably talk us through making the ham, but he's not up to trying to explain to us how to make the candied yams and bread. Just then, my cell phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Hey, wondering if you and Blake want to join my mom and me. We're going to spend a few hours volunteering at the soup kitchen. Today was December 23rd, still 2 days until Christmas. I figured we wouldn't start trying to make the fresh dinner rolls or candied yam until tomorrow. Sure, I texted back. An hour later, Mrs. Stevens and Grace picked us up. A light snow dusted the ground, hinting at the promise of a white Christmas. Isn't there a saying about how a white Christmas will make your wishes come true? The soup kitchen manager, Mr. Jackson, met us at the door. I'm so appreciative of your help. We have so much to do to get ready for Christmas Day. We're much more than just a soup kitchen, you know. We serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner here. His wife, Mrs. Jackson, shook our hands. It's terrific to have young folks help us. You know, we've worked here for 30 years, but we'll be officially retiring in February. So if you know of any chefs with restaurant experience who are interested in a fulfilling place to work, please let them know about us, she said. Blake and I exchanged looks. This place would be perfect for Dad. Of course, he could add a Peruvian twist to the menu. We might know someone, Blake said. Terrific. Here's our card. Just have the person send us a resume, Mrs. Jackson replied. How can we help you today? Mrs. Stevens asked. We're preparing for our Christmas Eve feast. We're making glazed hams, candied yams, and dinner rolls, Mr. Jackson said. Did I hear right? That's exactly what we need to learn how to make. Christmas magic must be in the air. Grace took a step closer to me and our shoulders brushed. I smiled and tentatively slid my fingers into hers. She looked into my eyes and squeezed my hand. I couldn't help but notice that her hand fit in mine just right. Okay, everyone, let's get to work. Follow me, Mr. Jackson said, leading us into the large kitchen.
Part 8 by Corinna Turner. Our assistant, Sue, can get you kids started with the yams. Mr. Jackson strode to a huge wall fridge and opened the door. And maybe your mum could... He broke off, staring. What the... Honey, where's the food? Mrs. Jackson looked around. Where's Sue? Surely she's back from the store by now. They both moved to the window and looked out into the parking lot. No, I don't see her car. Mr. Jackson pulled out his phone and dialed. Sue, where are you? How long till you get back with the food? He listened for a moment, eyes widening in horror. Okay, we'll think what to do. Stay calm. What's wrong? Mrs. Jackson hovered beside him as he lowered the phone from his ear. She can't get the food, whispered Mr. Jackson. She's been to every store, and all she's got is 3 packets of sliced ham and 2 pounds of yams. Mrs. Jackson gasped. That's not enough. We'll have 50 to feed, maybe even 60. What shall we do? Pray first, said Mr. Jackson, shakily, and then think. The old couple seized each other's hands and prayed softly, imploring God to send them the food. Now, Mr. Jackson opened his eyes again. What do we do? I exchanged glances with Blake and Grace. Our family's food? How could we? But all those poor families coming for their special meal. About that, I said. Dad was so horrified when we turned up to take the food away that it was all Blake and I could do to talk him out of calling Aunt Jody on the spot. It's still 2 days to Christmas, Dad. Grace or her mum will drive us, and they'll have restocked the stores by tomorrow. It's okay. So much for that. Now we'd visited every store, and all we'd got was 1 ham and a small bag of yams, and we were feeling lucky to have that much. Store assistants were practically laughing in our faces. Haven't you heard about the supply chain issues? Why didn't you buy sooner? What are we going to do? I said to Blake. Dad's going to call Aunt Jody. Blake stared bleakly at the back of Mrs. Stevens' driver's seat. What else can he do? We know how to cook the food now, but we don't have it anymore. It's over. Grace reached from the front seat and squeezed my hand gently. Maybe it's just not meant to be. It was hard to glare at her with her hand in mine, but I wanted to. I'm sure you'll have a lovely time at your aunt's, said Grace's mum bracingly. I wanted to beg her to try another town, but she and Grace had to get on with stuff for their own family celebration. They'd ferried us around for hours already. Blake and I watched their tail lights disappear up the road, then turned to look at the house. As soon as we went in and admitted our failure, our Christmas would be ruined. Well, not really. I couldn't help remembering all those poor families tucking into our ham and yams and tamales yesterday. Our Christmas would still be pretty darn good compared to some of theirs, I'd bet. But it wouldn't be the Christmas we'd been looking forward to for years. Lord, is this one of those unwelcome lessons about your will being better than anything we could come up with that Father Pat was talking about last Sunday? Because I was really hoping it was one of the ones about how the Lord provides everything. Apparently not. Oh, come on, said Blake. Let's get it over with. I was just reaching for the door when my phone rang. I pulled it out quickly. Maybe it was Grace. Nope. Unknown number. Hello? Is that Derek Cale? It's Mrs. Dooley. You kindly took some of our chickens home with you. Oh, hi, Mrs. Dooley. Yeah, our Christmas wouldn't be that bad. Our barn hadn't just burned to the ground. Your chickens are warm and happy. Is everything okay after the fire? Oh, I'm so glad. Yes, everything is okay. Well, the police think it was arson, so they've opened an investigation. That's... Her voice shook. That's distressing. But the barn was insured, thank God, and we got all the chickens out. So it could be worse. Arson? Who would set fire to a barn full of live animals, and with the farmhouse so close? No, Mrs. Dooley went on. I was calling because we were going to host our family celebration this year. But my daughter-in-law says she won't have her children sleeping under our roof until the police find out who did it, and she's sure it's safe. Mrs. Dooley's voice went rather small and wobbly. And, well, our other children have all decided to go and spend Christmas with them instead, and, well, we can't go because of the chickens, so... She cleared her throat hard and spoke more firmly. So we've got enough food for about 35 people. Could you use any of it? My heart leapt. Can we use any of it? We can use it all. Oh, how wonderful. Her voice wobbled again. We really won't need it, and we were so afraid it would be wasted. We'll take it on one condition, I said, my heart hurting for her. That you two come here on Christmas Day and help us eat it. Amazingly, when a fellow parishioner dropped us home after the early Mass on Christmas morning, we were on top of everything. Mrs. Dooley had helped us prepare the food the day before and had just arrived to help with the final push. The Cale clan were due to start arriving in an hour. The only thing missing was Mom, whose train had been delayed. But she should still be here by early afternoon, in time for the feast. Mr. Dooley pushed Dad out back in a wheelchair to visit his chickens and talk all things fowl, the best Christmas gift he could ask for, leaving Mrs. Dooley bustling around the kitchen happily, while Blake and I tried our best to help. Know any more about the arson? I asked, trying to fold a stack of napkins neatly. Everything had to be perfect for the feast. For Mom. The police are looking for a Mr. Fernandez, Mrs. Dooley told us, her hands flying as she beautifully arranged the hams on the serving dishes. They badly want to question him. He's come to the farm several times since he acquired the lease for a Peruvian restaurant, wanting to buy it. He seemed to think that if he could raise his own chickens on the cheap, he'd have more chance of keeping the restaurant going than the last owner. Blake and I exchanged looks. Which restaurant? Oh, somewhere in town. We've never been. We don't eat out much. Dad's old restaurant? Well, someone was going to take on the lease, I guess. We tried to explain to Mr. Fernandez that our chickens are high pedigree breeders, not meat animals, but he didn't seem to care. Oh, you know, we found a wonderful letter waiting when we got home yesterday. She blushed slightly. We've won a lot of prizes for our poultry, you see, and we've been wanting to expand our sales business for years, but it's hard to fund the leap. But a wealthy Kentucky farmer wants to invest. We'll finally be able to hire a good sales manager and get things moving. A sales manager. My heart began to pound. Mrs. Dooley? Yes, Derek. My friend's dad is an excellent sales manager, and he's looking for work. His firm were hit hard by everything and laid off a lot of staff. Would you consider him? If he has good references, we will most certainly consider him, beamed Mrs. Dooley. We'd just love to take on someone who really needs the work. My heart pounded even harder. Then I remembered the job at the soup kitchen. Had Blake told Dad? I'd forgotten all about it. I rushed outside and blurted it all out to Dad in a rush. He grinned. Yeah, your little brother told me already. It sounds like a good thing. Did you arrange to buy some of the hens for Teresa and Eva? I asked, glancing at Mr. Dooley as Blake came bouncing up beside me. Dad lost his smile. No, I won't be doing that. Why not? He fixed the pair of us with a grim look. Because you two promised them my hens, and I'm your father, so I guess I have to honour that. Blake and I exchanged a horrified look. But we intended to give them some other hens, blurted Blake. It was wrong of them to ask for your prized hens. Yeah, it was, growled Dad. But it's also wrong to trick them and not pay up. You know, 2 wrongs don't make a right, we chorused glumly. 2 right. Remember it next time, he snarled. I stared at my feet, unable to raise my gaze to Dad's. Beside me, I knew Blake was hanging his head too. See now, I'm going to give your dad the pick of these hens to have instead, said Mr. Dooley, clearly feeling sorry for us. So it could be worse. I shot a glance at Dad's tight face as he stared into the run, his eyes moving to his own birds, picking them out effortlessly, checking on them. Maybe, but not much worse. Dad would lose his hens on top of everything else, and it was our fault. Chaos descended on the house with the arrival of the Kale clan. Presents were piled under the tree for after the meal. Cookie tins were stacked out of the way with many annoying parental cries of, "Later, or you'll spoil the meal." Snoopy barked deliriously, and a very small cousin ran around screaming at anyone who would listen that we had 18 Tyrannosaurus Rex in our yard. 18! Tyrannosaurus Rex! For real! When I caught Blake's eye, he smirked and said, "I just told him chickens were descended from T-Rex, that's all." Our 4 aunts, along with Uncle Tim, who loved to cook, unfortunately, since he wasn't great at it, absorbed the unexpected Mrs. Dooley into their normal kitchen cohort with warm smiles, and soon the tables were groaning under delicious ham, yam, and every Christmas favourite eagerly anticipated by the hungry clan. Now we just needed... I'm here! Mom hurried through the door, shaking an umbrella with one hand and towing her suitcase with the other. I've just got to slip into fresh things, then we can head to Aunt... She broke off, staring into the living room, her jaw dropping open. It took a very long time for the laughter to die down. Then she hugged me and Blake about 20 times and rushed to get changed. Soon Dad was saying grace, and, finally, it was time to eat. For a moment, everything was perfect. Until Dad shot a glance out of the window into the yard and sighed. His hens. My heart sank. I exchanged a look with Blake. What could we do? Lord, you come through with everything else. This is our fault, not Dad's. Couldn't you fix it, please? Dad was halfway through carving the first ham when the doorbell rang. What the? I hurried to the door and opened it, Mum and Blake crowding behind me. 2 men in suits, flashing a badge. We're very sorry to trouble you on Christmas Day, but we're seeking 2 suspects for questioning in relation to an arson. On Christmas Day? Said Mom blankly. There's a possibility the arson was intended to take down occupied buildings. Perpetrators that show such disregard for human life cannot be allowed to get away, so, unfortunately, yes, on Christmas Day. Oh, well, how can we help? Asked Mum. Do you know the current whereabouts of Teresa and Eva Fernandez? Blake and I shot a look at each other, mouths falling open. Fernandez? Isn't that the name Mrs. Dooley said? They live over there, began Mum. But they're out of town, said Blake. Gone to visit their brother, I added. They said. The detective's eyes glittered. It's the brother we want, but we suspect possible collusion from the sisters. They handed Mom a card. If you see them, please call us immediately. Oh, of course. Stunned, Mom accepted the card. As soon as she'd closed the door, Blake and I turned to each other, whooped, and hugged one another, literally dancing for glee. You two, what on earth has gotten into you? Said Mum. How can you be so happy our neighbours may have been involved in something so wicked? That sobered us up fast. The Lord really did work in mysterious ways. But something told me Teresa and Eva wouldn't be coming for Dad's hens after all. Time to bring Mom up to date. But first we must tell Dad. His chickens were safe. It was going to be a perfect Christmas after all. The end.
We hope you enjoyed this look back at A Fowl Christmas, an original short story created by our friends at CatholicTeenBooks.com. Carolyn Asfalk, AJ Capitan, Anthony Kolink, Stephanie Engelman, Leslie Wall, Marie Kaiser, Andrea Jo Rogers, Corinna Turner. We want to thank them so much for writing and reciting this book for us. I also want to give a big thank you to my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.